Uh, Now it's my great honor to introduce again, and I've said this time and time again, no governor has done more for addiction treatment in the history of this state than our governor, Chris Christie. Can we have another round of applause? Thank you for your patience. No problem. So, Governor, during the course, and one, thank you very much for your patience,
Sure.
and Patrick was very well behaved, better than Jacqueline's. Jacqueline, could you please sit down and pay attention? Oh, today we talked a little bit about earlier in terms of addiction, and you've made that a primary focus of your administration in terms of treatment. Could you just share with us a little bit about your experience at Daytop and how you became involved and committed
Sure.
to the importance of treatment over incarceration?
Well, first off, thanks to the panel. I think it's always good for those of us who are in positions of responsibility to hear stories directly from folks who've been affected in their lives by the system that they've had to go through and how they found their way to the other side in a successful way. So I was happy to be able to sit here and listen to some of that directly. Back in 1995, so nearly 20 years ago, I became a freeholder in Morris County, and I was assigned to oversee the Department of Human Services as my area of responsibility. And that's when I first became acquainted with Daytop Village in Mendham, which is an inpatient adolescent drug rehabilitation facility. And what I found when I started to oversee them was I heard the stories from Father Joe Hennon, who was the founder of Daytop, New Jersey, and operating it at that time, that they had lots of children in Morris County who needed drug treatment, but because insurance didn't cover it and their family didn't have the resources, they weren't able to get it. And so one of the first things I did as a freeholder was to work with the other freeholders to say that that just shouldn't be, that if in fact, a child in Morris County is in need of drug rehabilitation, that they should be able to go and the county should pay for it. For the reasons that were mentioned by some of the folks up here in a different context, that kind of investment over the short term pays a yield in the long term that's multiples over what we pay. So we got that program established, and it's still there today.
Sure.
No child in Morris County goes without drug rehabilitation if they need it. But that's what got me involved with Daytop, because once I was doing that, I felt an even greater sense of responsibility to find out how they made things work there. And after I left the freeholder board involuntarily in 1997, I was asked by Father Hennon to join the board at Daytop, and I did, and remained on the board until I became United States Attorney in 2002, and have continued to be involved in the place as a private donor and supporter in the years since then. And to me, it's an extraordinary place because I said it's one of the only places in the world that I can go to on a daily basis and see miracles happen. And they do every day.
Every day. We talked a little bit about earlier that 70% of people behind bars are in active addiction. And you were kind enough to come up to Hudson County Jail and see some of the women, and some of the great women are here.
And they were on the panel, too.
Yes, and they were on the panel. Could some of our women stand up?
Yeah.
Like, don't be shy, whatever.
Yeah.
And so just in terms, and you've made drug court a real focus. How do you think we can do more to divert people away from incarceration to treatment programs, and why do you think that's so critically important?
Well, first of all, because incarceration's failed.
By the way, it's not often that a governor of a state can. Somebody please applause that. I will.
Well, I mean, listen, I know what you mean politically, that a lot of people are unwilling to say that, but the facts are pretty clear that if you send someone into incarceration with an addiction and you do little or nothing to help give them the tools to deal with that addiction, and then you release them back into society addicted, why is anybody surprised that they then commit additional crimes in order to feed their addiction? It makes no sense. And I think that while the war on drugs was started with the best of intentions, I think we now have 30 plus years of proof to show us that it's not being effective in the main. And so what we're doing in New Jersey and what we did together with the legislature was to say that over the next 3 years now, because we're into the third year of the phase-in, of a 5-year phase-in, that any non-violent first-time offender who has a drug addiction problem will not be incarcerated. They'll be sent to inpatient drug rehabilitation. This makes sense from my perspective twofold. First off, no life is disposable. And we see folks up on this panel today, and I've seen others over the course of time, where you know that if these folks get the help that they need to effectively deal with what is an illness, that they can become, once again, good mothers and fathers, good husbands and wives, good sisters and brothers, good sons and daughters. And that's huge for our society. But let's say I have a group of people in here who are just cold-hearted, that you don't care about whether life is disposable or not. And you're, let's say you're like my father, you're an accountant, and all you do is count the money, Well, in New Jersey, we have a situation where annually it costs us just short of $40,000 a year to incarcerate someone. Drug rehabilitation therapy for inpatient for a year is about half that. So if all you care about is the money, well, it makes sense from a fiscal perspective as well. And then when you add the multiplier to it, that when those folks have effective treatment, have the tools to deal with their illness, that, as Larry was mentioning before, they become employed. They pay taxes. They become not only tax-paying members of society, but part of the societal fabric. They once again are productive members of their families, raising children. They are volunteers. They're helping others. All things that they were not or could not do when they were in the throes of the addiction illness. And so to me, this is, I think, the most important thing that we've done in the last 5 years to make New Jersey a better society. And that's why, we're going to continue to do it.
Thank you. Can we? So in our program, and we heard the mayor talk earlier that we're 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's incarcerated population, and as we shared, with 70% of the people behind bars are incarcerated. We're doing some good things with integrity and Helena Muhammad and Ellen Egan. The other thing is job barriers, and whether it's cities or counties or the state or the private sector. There's a great nun in Trenton State, and Sister says to me, Jim, well, ex-offenders should have first preference to have jobs. And I said, Sister, that's a little radical. She says, but if we're talking the talk about getting people hired, we have to bring people back into employment. And so how do we address those institutional barriers that Larry talked about, that Gene talked about?
Well, I think a few things. First of all is our approach to it has to lead towards destigmatization. Right now, if we continue to treat drugs as an offense and not an illness, the stigma that comes along with offense, and Gene was talking about this, about 100 friends on the way in and 10 friends on the way out. Well, the fact is that if we continue to not educate the public of the fact that this is an illness, and this is an illness that can happen to anyone, regardless of education, regardless of economic condition, regardless of family status, any of those things, this can happen to you. That's one of the ways. Second way is there's certain ways government can do it too. And we're in the midst now of negotiating with the legislature an entire criminal justice reform package that could include things like ban the box. And
Senator Cunningham's legislation.
Right. And I'm working with Sandy and with the Senate President and the Speaker to come up with things that do two things. One, on those who commit really violent acts in our society repeatedly, well, those people need to be incarcerated. They need to be off the street because they're putting our families at risk. And in New Jersey, we don't have the ability to do that prior to trial because we have a constitution that says that everyone must get offered bail. Now, if you fix that part of it, on the flip side, we have thousands of people in our jails, our county jails and our state prisons, who are there because they couldn't make $2,500 in bail.
Thank you.
And they're not violent, and they're not an ongoing threat to society. What I think we need to do is get those people out, put them back on the street. And fortunately, I don't think that we'll have enough violent people to fill those jail cells of all the people who are the nonviolence. And if in fact that's what happens, then you're going to be able to see us save money from the perspective of closing a state prison, reducing the census in county jails. And that makes sense for us from a fiscal perspective, but it also makes sense for us in terms of getting people back onto the road to being productive citizens, to be able to be employed, and to reduce that stigma of having to sit in jail sometimes just because you're addicted. And so for me, I think lowering those barriers is about taking away the stigma to the extent that we can, but then also doing some practical things from a legal perspective that will allow people to make that transfer more easily.
And you touched on bail reform, and for many of the women that I work with, and Joe Russo from the Public Defender's Office, we find women that are in jail, Governor, frankly, for 9 months at a time, simply because they can't pay $250.
Right.
So in terms of an agenda, where do you see and how quickly do you think we can implement bail reform so that our justice system works for, God willing, all of us, not just those of us who have the financial means?
Well, I've been pushing for bail reform for 2 years. You know, when we first did the drug rehabilitation piece, the deal I thought I had made with the legislature was we'll do drug rehabilitation and bail reform together. What you find as governors, sometimes you make deals and you stay on your side and the other side doesn't do what they're supposed to do. So sometimes it's a process, as you know. I think we can get bail reform done before June. I think there is now a consensus in the legislature